You hand scissors?
Yeah, don't run with scissors. And hand them handle first. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, can the three girls sitting back there,
Yes.
can you guys get Bibles out of the work cabinet and pass those out? All the Bibles are in the chairs.
Wow.
If you don't have a Bible, raise your hand. Find a Bible. Find a Bible if you don't have a Bible.
All right.
Found a Bible.
Why Pat twice? Why do I have to get Pat twice?
I'm sorry. Okay, so have those ready for later. Okay, how many of you have been going to Grace for a while? Many of you have probably been going to Grace longer than I have. Okay, when I first moved to Grace, the Potters had a son, their oldest son, named John, and he was home for a year because he was taking a year off in between his undergraduate and his graduate school. And often, an activity that John and I and a couple other guys would do is we would go explore mines. Did you guys know that there are mines in this area? Okay, so Rosendale and Kingston used to be really famous for their natural concrete that the people mined from the ground. Actually, they used it for the Washington Monument and like supports for the Golden Gate Bridge, or not Golden Gate, one of the bridges to New York. But it was a really common thing. They mined a lot of it, and these mines are still in existence in Hasbrook Park, down in Rosendale, and we took to exploring them. Often we would go in, and what do you think one of the most essential parts or items was for us to bring if we were going caving? Yeah, some sort of light. So oftentimes we'd bring a flashlight or a headlamp. You know, I got a headlamp and I thought it was really cool. But those are pretty standard things that we would need. But one time when we went, we actually rappelled down into the middle of this cavern from a hole that was like in the ceiling. It was really cool. And when we got down there, a couple of the guys that had come with us had brought sticks that they had wrapped white undershirts around, and they brought lamp oil, and we dunked it, and instead of using flashlights, we used torches, which, I don't know, but it makes everything 10 times as cool, and we feel very much more like Indiana Jones.
Yep.
Exactly. So, it was kind of crazy because before we did that, we turned all our headlights out, and it is pitch black. No light, nowhere. We're down in the the tunnels of the mines more, so that you can't see any of the doors, no openings. It is pitch black. There's no stars. It's, you know, you cannot see anything in front of you. We're going to talk a little bit about darkness tonight, and so that was the best example that I had of darkness. Is right before we lit that lamp, before we lit that torch, what that darkness felt like, okay? So I would ask you guys to turn to Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to read verses 13 through 16. Matthew is the first book in the New Testament, and we're going to be looking at part of what is known as the Sermon on the Mount. It's when Jesus was doing some teachings. It's probably a compilation of a bunch of his different teachings. So we're going to look at one section from that.
Which one?
Matthew,
Yeah.
chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. If you don't have a Bible, look on with someone who does. Okay?
To what?
13 through 16. Okay? So I'll start in verse 13. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built or a city built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Okay, so you see how a little bit we refer to the light here. It's a consistent theme. But first, we're going to talk about something else first a little bit. Okay, so go back up to verse 13, And he starts off by talking about something else, not light. In verse 13 he says, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot." So, what is he talking about here? This would be you guys responding. I'll take the blatant, obvious answers first, and then we can move on.
Salt.
Emma?
Salt.
Salt. Okay, so we have salt. Thank you. That's a good start. You are the salt. It's the fourth word. It's 4 letters long. It's pretty simple. You guys have probably heard of that word before. It's a good place to start. What is he talking about with salt?
It's going bad.
Going bad. Okay. How many of you have ever used salt for anything? Most of you should have your hands up. You know, like a saltine, or then you have like a roast, or, you know, ketchup has a lot of salt in it. Hot dogs are pretty salty. A lot of the food you eat is really salty, actually, or they've added a lot of, exactly, salt to it. And he's talking about the salt losing its saltiness. Have any of you ever had that problem?
No, not really. I don't think that would ever happen with the real salt, because it's
right. You're actually,
salt.
Evan is very right. We don't have a problem with salt losing its saltiness.
Yes, it's called salt.
Okay. So, why do you think he refers to this problem? Anyone have any guesses?
My salt is perfectly fine at home. I actually have a salt shaker.
It's true. The salt that you have in your house that you use for eating doesn't lose its saltiness. But back in Bible times, Jesus is teaching here, and the salt that they would use is actually salt that would occur naturally. Like the Dead Sea is very salty. It's so salty, in fact, that you float almost much higher than you would in just on a normal lake.
Is it the edible salt? Or?
Yes, it's the same type of salt.
Yep, it's
But they actually have to go and harvest it, and one of the problems is that the salt there has other substances that are in the salt. And so, back in that time, salt could actually lose its saltiness if it wasn't stored correctly, or if it was exposed to the wrong elements, or if it was not used soon enough. And so it was used in certain ways because of that. Okay, so yes, you have to understand that, understanding that their salt didn't just remain in the constant state that we use it today because of the impurities in it. What do we use salt for now? There's a couple things we use it for.
Food.
Food. We use it to add flavor to our food.
Cure meat.
Cure meat. Is that something we do a lot?
Oh, but it's like a choice.
Okay. So it's a cure meat. What is curing meat? Does anyone know what curing meat or salting meat preserves? It preserves it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know why we don't have to preserve meat with salt anymore?
Because we
have freezers. Yes, thank you.
We have more advanced technology than that.
Exactly. We have much more advanced technology. So Jesus here is teaching about salt losing its saltiness. Do you really think he cares about how you season your food or how you preserve your, beef jerky? No, that's not at all his point. If he's not talking about that, what do you think he is referring to? Do you have any idea?
The soul?
Okay, maybe. Okay, so if we have salt, the object here is for our salt to stay salty, correct? You want the salt to remain in its original state, in its intended form, okay? Jesus is referring to us, and he says, "You are the salt of the earth." He's speaking to the Christian, saying, "I want you to stay salty." He wants the salt that is representative of the Christian in his life to stay salty. So if he wants the Christian to stay salty, we have salt that needs to stay salty. We have the Christian who needs to stay what?
Salty. Okay.
Okay, yeah. If you guys look in your Bibles, what comes right before this passage?
Is there pepper mentioned either?
Evan, hold up, okay?
Is pepper mentioned?
Okay, so we have the Christian, and he is supposed to remain a certain way. What comes right before this passage? The Beatitudes. Do any of you guys know what the Beatitudes are? Okay, they talk about how we are supposed to live our lives. It has a bunch of these statements that blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek. And it goes through this whole list. So in the same way that Jesus wants salt to remain salty, he wants the Christian to be consistent with these attitudes.
To remain in a relationship with Jesus Christ.
Yeah, to remain poor in spirit, to remain meek, to remain hungering and thirsting for righteousness. So he's setting up this comparison between salt and the condition of the Christian. He wants the salt to remain salty, but more so he wants the Christian to remain in him and remain true in his faith. Okay, so now move on beyond that. Okay, so now we're going to go to verses 14 and 15.
The pepper? Are we
No, Evan. In verses 14 and 15, you guys can follow along again in your Bibles. It says, "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house." Okay, so let's try this again.